How's it going? I'm Jeff Slakey, and again, through the Shelton School District, we're continuing some great conversations for the Employee Assistance Program. I'm here today with Peggy Zorn. She has an office at 2142 Railroad in Shelton. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, a little tiny bit nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous. This is going to be a great conversation, and you are an expert in this. And when I told some friends of mine who I was going to be talking to, they were very excited. You have quite a name for yourself around town
Sweet.
as being such a helper. We are talking about compassion fatigue today.
Yes.
And I think for a lot of folks, this topic kind of, perhaps like the pandemic, snuck up on us. So, can you give me a definition of what compassion fatigue is first, and then we'll kind of get into it a little bit?
Sure. So compassion fatigue is sort of a shutdown after too many bad things have happened, and that it's a grief times 10
Okay.
because it's not just a personal grief, but it's a broad grief.
And one of the things, as this is primarily focused to the school district, but also in kind of the research I've done before this conversation, it also not only impacts teachers and school district staff, but also the health care market, hospitals and nurses and things like that. And those two are the top two employers in this whole county. So
Absolutely.
there are a lot of folks around us that are struggling with this,
Right.
but may not fully realize what is happening. How is this compassion fatigue different from other feelings people might have in regards to burnout and things like that?
Right. It's which is a great question. So burnout is generally more job specific, and that it's like being overwhelmed at work. There's too much to do, not enough resources. We're certainly seeing nurses in that situation. Um, but it's often remedied by some time off. And compassion fatigue is much bigger than that. It becomes really an overall depression of the person, but it's not depression.
Hmm.
But they feel like there's no joy anymore, or the things that used to be beneficial to them are not so much, or they don't have even the energy to do those things.
And when I think about it in a school lens or a health care lens, when you are making your rounds at the hospital,
Hmm.
you are able to have an interaction with your patient here in this room, and you'll understand what they're going through and try to feel compassion
Right.
for them. And at some point, after the however many 10th, 11th, 12th time hearing the same stories, perhaps, or feeling that compassion to a patient, that's when the change kind of
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. And I think a lot of occupations don't talk enough about this,
Hmm.
that it's actually a really common thing, but I think that it's seen or appears to be a weakness when it's absolutely not that. That there, some person had a great quote about you're not too sensitive, you're feeling the feelings that are appropriate to the situation, but because it's not necessarily person specific,
Uh-huh.
it's hard to understand that.
And what have you come to understand about the way our society has kind of built up that as you shouldn't talk about
Right,
these types of feelings?
right.
And what is it about being able to talk through this and kind of break that barrier down, so not only you're able to, I don't know, help yourself through this, but then begin, because when I think about compassion and being compassionate, it's a great thing. It's
Yeah,
a trait that we humans have, that is just something to connect us all. And
Right.
if we don't talk about the barriers, or we're not able to get through our wall, I mean, how is that ripple out?
I think that what ends up happening is that a person has to shut down. So I think about school shootings as an example, that when Columbine happened, which is sort of the beginning of this latest grouping of school shootings, everybody was upset and responded, and certainly Sandy Hook being, a prime example of that, that there was horror to it. And I think that, like, when we hear about them now, because they haven't stopped, a lot of people feel numb to it.
Sure.
And even teachers having to do active shooter drills and those kind of things, there's a way that they have to shut down rather than to think about what that really means.
Is that different from compartmentalizing those feelings somewhere else in your mind or in your body and just trying to push past that? I think too about, unfortunate examples. There's the war going on in Ukraine.
Hmm.
And while it's and even as I'm about to say this, I can perhaps hear the fatigue in what I'm about to say, but as I'm watching this on the television, it's so far removed from my daily life and
Right.
the things that I have to get through. Is that also part of it too?
Hmm. Because I think compartmentalizing, we have to be able to do that. I have to be able to do that to do my job. But I think it's looking at, do I make time for it at some point? I'm a crier, so I cry every day. That at the end of my day, that's generally what I do to release some of that. And also world events, because I mean, the war is a great example of, I've had some people that's touched personally. So, it's there in those situations, but I mean, there's so much in our world. And the issues that are coming into the schools, poverty, abuse, all of those things that are huge. And teachers dealing with stuff that I think even 10 years ago wasn't like it is now. So if you're dealing with a kiddo that doesn't have enough to eat, that you can advocate for them, but there also is a way that that has to be compartmentalized.
Sure.
But in whatever the release way is there the ability to cry or to work out extra hard at the gym or to do something um, that releases some of that sadness? And the sadness is so appropriate, and the compartmentalizing is so appropriate. It's just that there has to be a release, or the person is going to pay, really.
Let's talk a little bit about different ways that folks are able. You talk about extra working out or crying, or we've had conversations here too on mindfulness and
Hmm.
awareness. And if you are practicing mindfulness in a way, does that, how is that a beneficial practice, or does that make you more aware of what's going on around you?
Right. I think it's a great practice because I think it keeps us current, like I can't be too far ahead or too far behind in order to do what I need to do. Um, And it does touch us into our feelings. And so I think that it's really useful. There's a great thing about compassion fatigue, the ABCs of compassion fatigue, and it's awareness, balance, and connection. And so the awareness piece is definitely mindfulness
Hmm.
and being aware of, like, what do I see on the news, and how much do, like, people play the news when they're not thinking about it, but it's going in.
Sure.
And so how do we monitor that? How am I aware of what's going on in my own personal life? And what do I do with that? Because that adds to compassion fatigue. And then, so that balance piece of, do I have joy in my life? How do I do that? Like I think about people I talk to who say, I just can't go for a walk. I know that it would help me, but I can't do it.
Right.
But can you go stand outside? Can you go stand on your porch? Um, do you have something that you can bring in that feels good to you? Right now, people say, like, I just can't decorate for Christmas. Okay, but could you put up twinkle lights somewhere?
Uh-huh.
And then connection that we have to have our people, whoever they are, we have to have our people.
When you talk about connection, I think about just the change over the course of my lifetime, perhaps, on how people connected and knowing your neighbors and getting out on bike rides. When I was a kid, you'd go out and play
Hmm.
until the street lights came on, and then you'd go home for the
Right.
day. And still in our neighborhood, when the weather's nice,
Hmm.
I try to spend a lot of time on my front porch.
Hmm.
And very rarely will I see people
Right.
even
Right.
walk by the neighborhoods. I
Right.
know my neighbor directly next to me and across the street, but I remember growing up and I'd know everybody in the
Right.
neighborhood. I know we're at a mile a minute lifestyle,
Right.
but how can we get back to that in some way, even if we're using devices to
Right.
make these connections? At least it's a start.
Yeah. So a lot of my friends are therapists. That's what we end up doing. And we've all talked about, like, at the end of the day, I don't want to talk to anybody.
Right.
But we did learn this thing of I could text and say, hey, you know, just want you to know I'm thinking about you. Or I think it's as simple as if I go in the post office, smiling at people. Or, if I like somebody's hat, to say, hey, cool hat, instead of just keeping it all inside.
Uh-huh.
I watched at the post office the other day, one of the guys that hands out packages was dressed like a Christmas tree. And it was wonderful to watch people walk in, and people were grumpy because it's a line, and they saw him, and it was like this instant joy.
Sure.
So I think it's going out of our way to talk to a stranger, say hi to a stranger. And our neighborhoods, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about that, I was thinking about how many people have no idea who their neighbors are. And, so waving, saying hi, taking the garbage can over. I have a neighbor that always takes my garbage can back over and says, it's because you come home late at night and I hate to think of you doing it. And that touches me so much. So it's those little things that are part of connection.
And when we were talking about mindfulness and the start, people feel like, or with a gym example, people
Right,
feel like you have got to go to the gym and spend an hour at the
right,
gym. Oh my gosh. And then you go, well, I don't have an hour, so I'm not even going to
right,
do it.
right.
But if you can do 15 seconds of breathing and help kind of center yourself,
Yeah,
and these activities that you're saying, they they take seconds, but the ripple and the long standing effects are big.
exactly. It's like self-care, which is like way overused, but self-care is essential. But it's not just getting a massage once a month.
Uh-huh.
It really is that, like if you're making yourself a cup of tea, let it be a celebration. Like I am sitting with my cup of tea right now, which brings the mindfulness in. And it's just an acknowledgement of, I need a little moment. Even if it's just a moment, if you got a baby crying over there and a toddler running around, you may only get to say, oh, it's kind of warm on my hand. I like it. Now I've got to attend to my people.
Uh-huh. So you said you have a massive background in this and you've studied this for a long time. Your friends are
Hmm.
studiers of this as well. But what about the average person in our community? The teachers and some of the healthcare professionals get some training on
Yeah,
this, but nowhere near what you get,
right,
obviously. And the folks who aren't in those industries may not get any of it.
right,
So as they have a chance to listen to this, what are some of the ways? Let's start with adults, and then we can move into how we can bring kids into this as well.
Right.
But what's the first step for an adult to kind of start this process?
Well, I think don't be embarrassed and to understand. I mean, one of the things I think we don't teach enough to people in general is the need to debrief. Like if you drive by a car accident, you have a feeling about that, like, that's sad, but we don't talk about it to anybody. Or if a teacher at school sees a kid being hungry, that it's like we just learn to move on and being able to say, that's hard. Tell one of the other teachers, like, I just need a minute to say, ouch, that's hard. Or somebody driving by an accident to be able to call their friend and say, I drove by an accident and that was rough. You know,
Kind of
that
being vulnerable.
very, but knowing that it's not weak.
Right.
And, you know, I think about police officers, and I think about ambulance drivers and how much they have to just keep it all inside and the need to, I mean, we've had police officers come here to our offices to be able to just say, yeah, our work is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we do see the ugly in life. They see the ugly in life. I see the ugly in life. Um, but we have to be able to talk about it. So, like here at my office, we have 6 therapists. We will sometimes pop into somebody else's office and say, I just need a minute. It's been a rough day. Can you give me a hug?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that we're not needing to talk about anything specific, but just, oh, my heart kind of hurts today.
Gets back to the connections that a lot of us remember having more often than we
Yes.
are now.
Yeah. Yeah. And feeling like it's okay to have the things we see impact us. I teach people who are learning to be counselors. I always talk about when I was taught that if I had feelings, yeah, 100 years ago, but if I had feelings about my work or what I was hearing from clients, that somehow I had to overcome that.
Uh-huh.
Like I needed to seek my own therapy, which I think we all do, but it wasn't to overcome it, it was to learn how to do it. Like how to make that time, for me, it's crying, but how to make that time to just offload a little bit. So it could be go. I had a dog that died before this dog, and I was so incredibly sad. And there was nothing to say the day that he died. I was out raking leaves because that's all I could think of to do. And my best friend came over because I kept saying I don't have anything to say, and she came over with her rake and raked with me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we just silently raked and I cried and she cried. But it's finding those ways to say, I know you hurt and it's okay, you know, that it makes sense.
What are some different outlets that you can talk about that folks, whether or not they want either to choose trying these different outlets like the gym or the crying or
Hmm.
the raking, for example, what are some other things that folks may not necessarily think about as a way to help with that awareness and self-care and kind of recentering?
Hmm. I think if somebody can even do that practice of debriefing a little bit. So, again, in my teaching, like I start every class with, how are you? Like, let's check in first as people before I fill your heads with a bunch of information. I think at schools that's easy to do, to just say, hey, how are you when you pass another teacher in the hall? Um, Being able to think about what feels good to me and how do I do it. So again, that if I can't go for a mile long walk, can I go stand outside and just let myself be for a minute, you know, kind of back to that mindfulness
Uh-huh.
again. But what are the little ways that I can do to acknowledge that? I mean, it's a hard life, it's a hard world. And what are the ways that I do to say, oh, just a breather for a minute.
And how do you give your clients the permission to do that?
I just talk about that. It's normal. So it's not an abnormal feeling, and that when we can know that, that like you talk about the war in Ukraine, if we can know that, wow, that is so rough to think about. That's how those folks are living right now. That it's a normal feeling to go, oh, I feel sad about that. Um, that's great. I think about um, the dancer on Ellen that just took
Yeah,
his life. And I think that so many people think, well, I didn't know him, so I shouldn't be crying about it, or I shouldn't be so sad about it. It's like, no, of course feel sad about it, and let that be okay. That's normal. That's not abnormal.
let's talk about teachers now and their students. And what are some of the signs, perhaps, that they can recognize that a child may be going through this, and how um, they can navigate that, talk about it in a general sense to the
Hmm.
class, or figure out a way to include their guardians into the
Hmm.
conversation.
I think normalizing grief and normalizing that grief isn't just a death, and that if there's a hard thing that's happened at school, certainly we have tragedies that happen where somebody does die, but just I pay attention to how much is the kiddo watching the news, because they don't have the ability to process it.
Uh-huh.
And if nobody's talking to them about it, it sits in them in a hard way. So I think if in classes we're normalizing it's okay to talk about something that's sad, it's okay to have compassion for other people. I think about bullying. And, when a kid is observing somebody being bullied, they have a lot of decisions to make.
Right.
So do I say something? Do I feel something? Do I decide I don't like that kid either? Because we target sometimes when we're feeling overwhelmed and sad. I think the pandemic was a great example of for teachers that when teachers didn't have like immediately online school set up and have a plan, that no one knew we were going to have a pandemic. But I think that people, the community, every community in their fear targeted teachers. What's the matter with you?
Right.
So when we could talk about those things with kiddos, like it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel scared, it's okay to not know what to do. That those are great things to give to kids because then we can teach them when do you know that it's time to talk to somebody else? And how do you validate your feelings? There aren't any feelings that are wrong.
So if the news is on and they're talking about adult things,
Right.
things that are happening in the world, it's okay, or how do you talk to a child at any age, let's just say 18 and below?
Right.
Um, do you have to talk to them? Can you talk to them like you would another adult, I guess, is the question.
Partly. I mean, I think about, if I go back to like 9/11, and people had the news on 24/7.
Sure.
And kiddos, especially littles, don't have the ability to know that that's not still happening.
Right.
That it happened and it was awful, but it's not still
The
happening.
replay is
Yeah,
not a
it
current, it's not
exactly.
always happening. I see.
Exactly. So I had little kids come in and say, when's it going to happen in our town? And being able to talk about that, the news is re-showing some things, and it was awful, and it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel scared. It's also okay to not keep watching the news. Like we ask parents, please don't keep it on. um, with anything that's going on. It's like parents have to find a way to help the kid know. I mean, there's a war in Ukraine and it's sad, and there's people who are scared. Is there something we can do? Can we send money? Can we, as a school, collect money to send to Ukraine or to send to, the Northeast where they're having terrible snowstorms
Uh-huh.
right now? Like, kids love to get involved. They love to do stuff, which is also another thing that helps adults. It's like, I may not be able to do a thing for this particular kid, but can I give money to the food bank? Or can I, make it a point to every time I go grocery shopping to buy two more cans of soup and drop it off there? We have a collection box in our office and it's been 5, 6 years and it's so touching. They're never empty.
Would you suggest that when these events happen, that the guardians are the first to address it so they don't hear it perhaps in a school setting, or they come home and from class and say, well, we learned about this, and now the parent feels almost on their heels that they've got to fill in the blanks
Right.
or shield them from the
Yeah.
information?
Well, I have to say first that I think it's important for kids to know what's going on.
Okay.
I think it's a mistake when we don't let kids know. So I don't think they have to know like every detail of something. But, again, if I go back to the dancer on Ellen, I think it's a great conversation that, yeah, he took his life. And that sometimes people feel really sad and we don't know, which is why it's important to check in with each other. And it's good that if you feel sad that you talk to somebody about it. I think shielding kids from things that are happening is a mistake because kids are incredibly perceptive. So they know, that, like, I think about couples when they're having a hard time and they say, we're not going to talk to our kids about it.
Right.
It's like, no, the kid can know, hey, we're having a hard time right now and we're trying to figure it out. And maybe they're saying, we're in counseling, and they don't have to give all the, gritty details, but kids need to know something, that um, with like political strife. Again, kids don't need to know every detail of it, but that, yeah, people are fighting a lot right now.
Yeah.
And how can you work on that on your playground at school?
Sure.
I think it would be great to teach kids mediation skills,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, I think kids need to know.
You're again very well known in our community, and I know that your schedule is very busy, but there are plenty of folks around the area that can talk about this. Um, do you see a light at the end of this? I know the pandemic hit everybody very hard, and as we're on perhaps the tail end of it, while at the same time the other sicknesses are going around so
Right.
much. But do you see and do you talk with your colleagues that hopefully in the next 6 months, year and a half, that we'll get back to some sort of semblance of reconnection or getting back involved with our communities where we can have these conversations?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think we're going to hit another peak of this. It's like that trifecta that's going on
Yeah,
right now. And I think it's what makes people angry and sad, both
sure.
like, I'm not going to wear my mask, or, oh, okay, here we go.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think it will be different. I don't think it'll ever be what it used to be. I think in good ways. I think in really good ways. Like, yay, let's use hand sanitizer more than we used to. Or, like, I had a cold a couple of weeks ago, not that horrible cold, but I wore a mask, when I wasn't necessarily masking. And I think that will continue. Um, but I also think we have to talk about that it's been hard. Like, I don't think we know all the results of the pandemic
Right.
yet. And mental health, I know that a lot of people have been frustrated because counselors are full. And we're always trying to, like, I have an intern right now so that we can give, more people more services. But I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I have total hope for our humanity. And that the more we learn how to do these kinds of things, that it'll be good. I think that people heal when they're willing to be authentic and vulnerable. And that, again, cheesy, but I think when one person heals, they help people in their family.
Sure. This has been a fascinating conversation, of course, and I've learned a lot and learned a lot about this. I know that there are, again, two of the highest employed professions in Mason County are the two professions that really have been hit hard with this
Yes,
topic. So there is definitely people wanting to understand more about it and to get some of the tips that they can pass on to their families and to their friends. It's, encouraging to hear that you too go talk to people
hmm,
and how that all works. I'm again talking with Peggy Zorn here. She has a practice on 2142 Railroad in Shelton. Um, there are people out there available. There's even digital resources now where
yeah,
you can chat with a
yeah,
person, and that might open it up. That might make it easier for someone because it's a little more anonymous. I'm not seeing your
absolutely,
face, or I'm not going to see you
yeah,
at the store and go, oh my
yeah,
gosh, she knows all about me, and
exactly.
something like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's another way the pandemic has helped is that it opened up telehealth resources.
Yeah,
And there's companies like BetterHealth is one. I know that there's other ones that are totally, that's what they do is telehealth. And it's like you can see somebody in Seattle,
sure.
that it's easy to do that now.
Well, again, I know you're real busy, but I really appreciate the time that you took to talk with me about this.
It's been great. I love talking about it.
It's again Peggy Zorn here. We're talking about compassion fatigue and some of the ways that you can understand that you are feeling this, and some ways to help get through and move on to the next thing that is on everybody's plate, because
Yeah,
everybody's really busy. Again, a great conversation through the Employee Assistance Program for the Shelton School District, and thank you so much.
sure. It's been my pleasure.